Welcome to Restoria, your cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories. My name is James and I'll be your host tonight. Every night, we bring you peaceful tales designed to calm your mind and help you drift off into a deep, restful sleep. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. The story tonight is called A Quiet Day at the Louvre. Chapter 1: Morning Light at the Pyramid. The city of Paris was just beginning to stretch awake when Clara stepped off the bus near the Place du Carrousel. Morning mist softened the corners of buildings, and the cobblestones glistened faintly under a silver sky. Paris moved slowly at this hour like a story easing into its first paragraph. Ahead of her, the Louvre rose quiet and vast. The wings of the museum opened like arms around the Cour Napoleon, where the famous glass pyramid shimmered under the early light. It looked like a frozen ripple in the middle of the courtyard, its panes catching the pale gold of dawn. Clara stood still for a moment, her gloved fingers curled around the strap of her bag, notebook tucked safely inside. She had come alone, not out of sadness, not quite. More from the ache of wanting quiet. She was used to movement daily trains, crowded sidewalks, meetings stacked like dishes in a sink. But today, for once, she had no plan except to walk through this place where centuries of stillness lived. The courtyard was nearly empty. A handful of early visitors lingered by the fountain, and a pair of pigeons fluttered up onto the ledge of a stone lion. Clara passed through the glass doors, the hush of the museum wrapping around her shoulders like a shawl. Inside, the marble floors whispered beneath her boots. The ticket agent barely looked up as he scanned her pass. Somewhere behind her, the shuffle of a janitor's cart echoed faintly. But the galleries ahead waited like unopened letters. She chose no path. She simply wandered. In the Denon wing, the first paintings she saw were immense battle scenes, robed kings, twisted mythologies stretched in gold and canvas. She admired them but didn't stay. Their noise was quiet now, but it still pressed. Clara turned a corner and found herself before a soft-toned landscape, an open field under a slate-colored sky. The trees were bare, but not forlorn. The brushwork felt like breath. She didn't reach for her notebook. Not yet. She let herself look, and only look. The longer she stood there, the more she noticed. A figure tucked beneath a tree, a path that curved out of sight, a single bird in flight, so small it seemed a mistake until she recognized its purpose. She moved slowly through the next galleries, past stormy seascapes, portraits with eyes that didn't blink, sculptures whose limbs still held the memory of motion. Each piece carried its own silence, some heavy, some like a held breath. And then she reached the Salle des États. She didn't rush forward. The Mona Lisa was there, of course, smaller than expected, surrounded by a quiet swarm of phones and cameras and reverent murmurs. Clara stood a few steps back, to the left. The painting looked straight through the crowd, as if only half seeing them. Clara stayed there, still. She didn't feel the need to get closer. She just wanted to see. And as she stood watching that strange, slight smile She thought about all the people who had stood here before her, all the eyes that had met this gaze. How many had come hoping for something grand, only to find something still instead. The moment passed. She turned and continued on. In a quieter corridor where the light came in through high windows, she found a small bench across from a painting of a woman reading by candlelight. The frame was simple, the woman's dress unremarkable, but her expression held something deep and restful. Clara sat down. She opened her notebook and wrote, "The hush in this room is older than me." She reads like the world isn't ending. Maybe stillness is the art, and not just the subject. She capped her pen and closed the book, not for recording, just for containing. More visitors trickled in as the morning wore on. But Clara stayed seated. Her shoulders softened, her eyes didn't search. It wasn't that the painting had answers. It was that it didn't need to. When she finally stood, the light had shifted. Outside, the sky was clearing. The museum would grow louder, fuller, brighter. But Clara had found what she didn't know she was looking for. The kind of calm that doesn't leave when you stop looking at it. She stepped out into the courtyard again. The glass pyramid gleamed under the rising sun. The sound of footsteps had returned, but they didn't bother her. Clara walked toward the river, her bag a little lighter. Her notebook was still closed, but her eyes had opened. Chapter 2: The Shape of Silence. Clara returned to the Louvre the next day before the crowds arrived. Paris, still soft with morning, greeted her with its usual hush, the kind that lingers just after sunrise, when the cafes haven't yet opened their windows and the Seine flows like a secret. Inside the museum, the marble was cool beneath her shoes, and the vast halls still held the night stillness. She wandered without a map again, letting her feet choose the path. Eventually, she found herself in a long room filled with sculpture. The light here fell from above, diffused and golden, as though the ceiling itself understood reverence. Rows of white figures stood quiet in their alcoves. Gods with downcast eyes, muses frozen mid-thought, hands outstretched in gestures that felt half-finished. One sculpture drew her in. It was not the most dramatic. It wasn't even the most beautiful. Just a simple figure seated, cloaked, with one hand curled gently over its chest as if holding something invisible. A woman, maybe. Or someone who had once been. Clara sat across from it, notebook in her lap. She watched the light shift over the marble face. There was something about the way it held the air, as if the sculpture knew how to listen. She wrote, "She is more breath than stone. She doesn't speak, but I hear her. Some silences shape you." Her pen scratched softly across the paper. Around her, a few tourists passed through, murmuring, pointing, clicking cameras, but they didn't stay long. Clara stayed. She studied the folds of the cloak, the subtle twist of the figure's torso, the way the marble seemed to hum with pause. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, her mind didn't feel like it needed to be anywhere else. Later, she wandered through other galleries, her steps slower now. She lingered by a bronze cast of a dancer in mid-step. She traced the brushwork of a hazy countryside painted in soft greens and violets. But her thoughts always drifted back to the figure in white. Before leaving for the afternoon, she returned. The sculpture hadn't changed, but somehow Clara had. She stood this time, didn't write, just placed her palm lightly on the edge of the wooden bench, a small gesture of thanks. Outside, Paris had brightened. The rhythm of traffic had returned. The world was awake again. But Clara walked slower. Inside her, something had been unknotted. Stillness, she realized, wasn't the absence of movement. It was the kind of attention that doesn't need noise. And the figure in white had given her that. Without asking for anything in return. Chapter 3. The Gallery of Small Things. On the third day, Clara entered the museum not as a visitor, but as someone returning to something almost familiar. The guards nodded. The corridors greeted her with their echoing quiet. She walked more slowly, now not out of tiredness, but from something else, a trust in the rhythm of it. The art didn't hurry, neither did she. She made her way past rooms she now recognized. The marble staircase that curved like a ribbon, the gallery where the saints glowed beneath gold leaf. But instead of revisiting the grand pieces, she turned into a smaller gallery tucked along a less traveled hallway. The room was narrow, lined with modest paintings, still lifes. Windows open to quiet landscapes, children reading, shoes left beside chairs, small things. She paused in front of one in particular, a desk, an open drawer, a single lemon resting on a folded napkin. The background faded to near shadow. There was no story in the traditional sense, and yet it felt like the moment just before something. Clara stepped closer. The brushstrokes were loose but deliberate. She could almost smell the citrus. The drawer, slightly ajar, felt like a thought not finished, or a memory returning just before sleep. She took out her notebook. Some paintings do not want to be explained. They want to be remembered. She sat on the bench in the middle of the room. A few visitors passed through quickly. No one else stopped. That's how it often is, she realized. The quietest things are overlooked by those searching for spectacle. But Clara wasn't searching anymore. She was noticing. She walked through the rest of the gallery slowly. A vase with a crack. A portrait of a woman whose hands were more detailed than her face. A painting of rain falling on empty stairs. Each one felt like it belonged to someone who had lived quietly, loved gently, passed without noise. Each painting was a whisper. She wrote, "This room is full of stories that trusted they'd be found." She stayed in that gallery longer than she'd meant to, and when she finally left, she looked back one more time at the lemon on the napkin. There was something about it that made her feel held. Out in the larger halls, the buzz of tourists returned. Cameras flashed. Children's footsteps clattered. but none of it touched her. She carried the hush of the small gallery with her like a stone warmed in her palm. That evening, back in her room above the street market, she didn't write. She didn't need to. The painting was still inside her. So was the silence. So was the drawer, half open, waiting for someone to remember what was inside. Chapter 4. Tuileries Afternoon. Clara stepped into the sunlight with the hush of the museum still folded around her. The sky had opened wide, pale blue and brushed with high, wispy clouds. The Louvre stood behind her now, its quiet heart still beating in her chest. Ahead, the gravel paths of the Jardin des Tuileries stretched like soft invitations, curving gently between rows of neatly clipped hedges and ancient trees just beginning to blush with early spring. She didn't walk with purpose. She let the day guide her. Children darted between benches with wooden sailboats in hand, heading for the large octagonal pond at the garden's center. Pigeons strutted with calm confidence near cafe tables. Somewhere behind her, a violinist played something slow and romantic beneath the canopy of a sycamore. Clara sat in one of the pale green chairs that lined the edge of a reflecting pool. The chair creaked gently as she leaned back, crossing her ankles. She watched the surface of the water ripple with light. She reached into her bag but didn't open the notebook. Instead, she watched. A woman in a red scarf walked slowly, trailing one hand along the backs of the chairs. An older man in a flat cap folded his newspaper precisely and set it beside a steaming espresso. A child placed a leaf into the water and followed it like a secret message. All of it was quiet. All of it was art, in its own way. Clara tilted her face to the sun. She had thought this trip would be about seeing the great things. The Mona Lisa, the Winged Victory, the treasures of empires. But the paintings that stayed with her were smaller. The sculpture that had stilled her had no name, she remembered. And now, it was the city itself, this garden, this hour, that painted the clearest picture. She finally opened her notebook and wrote, "The Louvre taught me how to look. Paris reminds me to keep looking." She smiled at her own sentimentality but didn't erase it. Nearby, a breeze picked up, scattering petals across the gravel. One landed near her foot. She picked it up and pressed it between the pages of her notebook. Later, she wandered down a shaded lane where statues stood quietly between patches of sunlight. A young couple was sketching side by side, backs resting against a tree. Their papers were filled with simple lines, but the way they looked at each other said more than the drawings ever could. Clara didn't interrupt. She just watched. Sometimes, witnessing was enough. She circled the garden slowly, looping past fountains, under trellises, beside sleeping dogs and rustling tulips. By the time she reached the far edge of the garden, the sun was lower, casting long gold shadows on the gravel. The breeze carried with it the scent of warm earth and pastry. She stopped at a small cart and bought a single madeleine, still warm. Sitting beneath a chestnut tree, she ate it in small bites. She didn't take a photo. She didn't check the time. She just let the moment unfold like a quiet page. And when she finally rose to leave, she walked with that same slowness the art had given her. A rhythm she hadn't known she needed, now etched gently into the hours. Back at her room, she placed the petal on the desk beside the museum ticket. Then she opened her notebook one last time that day and wrote, "There is a garden in the city that hums softly with gratitude." I sat inside it, and it did not ask me to speak. Chapter 5. The Painting That Waited. Clara returned to the Louvre one last time. It was morning again. This time, clearer sunlight touched everything, from the pavement outside to the wide marble staircase just beyond the entrance. She moved quietly, confidently, nodding to the security guard she now recognized. The museum was already breathing in visitors, but Clara had a destination in mind. She made her way through the familiar halls, her steps quicker than usual, past the winged sculptures, beneath the vaulted ceilings, and down the corridor where paintings leaned quietly into the light. The room was just as she'd left it. Empty, soft, hushed. And the painting's still there. The woman reading by candlelight. Clara approached slowly. There was a moment of hesitation, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what this painting had become. It wasn't just a picture. It was a place, a feeling. She sat on the bench across from it, the same one where she'd written her first notes. This time, she didn't reach for her notebook. She simply looked. The folds of the woman's dress, the warm orange glow around her hands, the unreadable title of the book in her lap. It all felt more vivid, more known, or maybe Clara had just learned how to see it. The museum noise outside the gallery faded into a gentle hush. She thought of the lemon on the napkin, of the white marble figure with her hidden breath. She thought of the Tuileries and the petal in her notebook, of the people she'd seen but hadn't spoken to, the ones whose quiet had made the city softer. Clara leaned forward and whispered a small thank you to the painting. Not for any one thing, but for holding space when she needed it. Then she stood and took out her notebook. On a blank page near the back, she wrote, "We find stillness, not by asking for it, but by recognizing when it's been waiting for us." She folded the page neatly, slipped it between the slats of the bench, a quiet offering for the next person who might need to pause. As she walked back through the museum, she didn't look for anything else. She wasn't searching anymore. She had already found it. Outside, Paris waited in full daylight, and for the first time since arriving, Clara felt as though the city had opened not as a place to conquer or capture, but as a place that had been listening all along. She walked without a destination, and carried stillness like a language only she needed to understand. Chapter 6. A Window on the Train. Clara packed slowly. The little apartment above the market was still and golden. Light touched the tiled floor in angled beams, and the scent of fresh bread from the boulangerie below curled softly around the curtains. She folded each item into her suitcase like a page being turned. She didn't bring much back with her. Just her notebook, a pressed petal from the garden, and the small museum pass she had used 3 days in a row. Her sketches remained simple. Her notes were few. But everything important was already inside her. Outside, the city was beginning to move. Scooters buzzed along the Rue Montorgueil. Laughter floated from a nearby cafe. A child dragged a stick along the railing of a garden gate, counting softly. Clara opened the window one last time and leaned out. Paris looked the same, but she knew it differently now. The taxi arrived just after noon. She rolled her suitcase quietly down the steps, pausing once to glance back at the door, as if to nod to the week she'd lived within. The ride to Gare de Lyon moved past places she now recognized, not because she'd taken photos, but because she'd noticed them. The red cafe with the drooping awning, the lamppost near the bridge with stickers from travelers long gone. At the station, she found her platform early. Her train would leave in 40 minutes. She bought a coffee, black, warm, strong, then took a seat by the tall window overlooking the tracks. From her bag, she drew the notebook again. She opened it not to write, but to reread. The lines she'd written beside the painting of the woman reading, the sketch of the statue with its quiet hand, the lemon on the napkin, the sentence she left folded on the bench. Each entry was a stone in a path she hadn't known she was following. Clara didn't need to understand it all. That was never the point. She closed the notebook gently and watched the clock hands inch closer to departure. When the train arrived, she boarded without hesitation. Her seat was by the window. A clean pane of glass framed the platform like a still life. People said their goodbyes. Suitcases bumped over tile. An old woman wrapped a scarf tighter around her shoulders. Clara watched. She didn't wave. She didn't take a photo. She simply let the moment settle. As the train pulled away, the city drifted past cathedrals, chimneys, trees folded into gray-blue shadow, and as the buildings gave way to fields, she leaned her head gently against the window. The hum of the train soothed her, and in her lap, her fingers rested lightly on the cover of her notebook. She wasn't finished, but she was full. Not with noise, with quiet. And as Paris became distance, Clara carried the stillness like a painting remembered not by its name, but by the hush it left behind. Chapter 7. Still life, still here. Back home, the pace returned quickly, but Clara didn't. Her apartment was small, filled with familiar things. A kettle that hissed unevenly, books in soft stacks, windows that framed only brick and occasional sky. Nothing had changed. Except her. She unpacked slowly. A week had passed, but the memory of Paris still clung to her like the scent of lavender in old paper. The pressed petal, now slightly faded, found a place in a teacup on the windowsill. Her notebook lay open on her desk, inviting nothing and everything. She made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved. Buses growled past, dogs barked down the alley. Someone argued gently on the phone a floor below. But Clara heard the hush beneath it. The museum was not with her, but its quiet had stayed. She began noticing small things again. The way the light hit the chipped paint of the windowsill just before 10. The hum of her radiator, low and steady, like a cello in another room. The smile of the barista at the cafe who always forgot her name but never her order. She opened her notebook, not to write, but to reread. She traced the sketches, touched the corner where the pedal had pressed. Then, slowly, she turned to a new page. She wrote, "Stillness isn't a place. It's a way of seeing. And once you've seen gently, it's hard to go back." Clara didn't try to capture Paris again. She didn't need to. It had already shaped her gaze. She went to the art museum in her own city, smaller, quieter, but in the corner of a second-floor room, she found a portrait with the same kind of silence. Not identical, but familiar. She stood in front of it for a long time, not analyzing, not admiring, just receiving. She walked home afterward through the park, noticing how the trees leaned into each other in the wind. That night, she placed the notebook back on her shelf, but she didn't close it. She knew she'd return. Not to the Louvre, not to Paris, but to the part of herself that had slowed down, that had opened. Clara washed the dishes slowly, folded a shirt with both hands, watched the steam curl from her tea. It all felt like art. Not because it was beautiful, but because she saw it. And once you begin seeing like that, you don't stop.